So welcome to the panel, the feminist panel on international perspective, what to do afterwards the crisis, what we are doing right now, what we could do from an international perspective, but also what is going on in different parts of the world right now from a feminist perspective. And I want to introduce you to the panelists. First, we do have Agnieszka from Poland. I hope I said your name right. And she is part of the Polish activist feminist group called Dziebuche. Is that right? Cool. Which are standing up against the rise of the right wing in Poland and are fighting for women's rights because women are the people who are quite mostly affected by all of this brutality done by the Polish government. We'll talk about abortion rights later. And you are also living in Berlin, where you organize protests as well, I read. And also you are part of some collectives where you raise awareness about diversity and inclusiveness also in the rave scene and with other leaders. Yes, and then we also have Dinah. She is from Lebanon, but currently she's staying in New York, so she lives between two worlds at least. And she is organizing a space for artists in Beirut. You just correct me if I'm wrong, right? And you also are organizing the revolution in Lebanon between two, with others of course, between two worlds, and are one of the persons who are organizing the one queer space in Beirut that is existing for artists. Is that right?
Yes and no. So I'm part of the revolution. I can't feign to say that I organize it. And Haven is an artist and activist collective for LGBTQI and women in Beirut. It's one of the spaces now that sadly the revolution is happening, not sadly, thankfully the revolution is happening, but due to financial crisis, a lot of the cultural spaces had to close. So now we're in that. And I'm stuck in New York. I don't live here. I'm stuck here because of Corona. So I should be back hopefully June 8th when the airport opens.
Okay, so already the first thing that's due to because of Corona, where you can't act the normal way you do normally. I'm just to introduce myself. I'm from Switzerland. I'm part of the USO, the Young Socialists of Switzerland, and we are organizing together with other left socialist groups around the world these panels. I think it's the third one, and there are more to follow. So in 2 weeks, we are going to have a panel about democracy and COVID-19, also with international guests. Well, now I want to organize this panel in 4 different sectors. The first about the care work, the second one about violence against women or LGBT people, the third one about the abortion rights, because I think that's really in focus right now in different countries for many reasons. And the last but not least is how do we organize as feminist groups internationally, but also nationally, with that crisis. What do we take out of it? How do we take some learnings from it or not? Exactly. So for the care work, first simple but I think really interesting question: how does your country normally handle care work, childcare, or care for elderly people? How's the infrastructure? And I would like Dinah. Yeah.
Part of our revolution currently that's been going on for 7 months in Lebanon is due to the lack of a sturdy infrastructure that actually supports its citizens, whether it be the youth or the elderly. So there's a massive gap with our pensions. There's no actual, they're actually bankrupt currently. Our pensions are gone. Everyone that's been paying their pensions for years are gone. So there's no retirement age really. You still see taxi drivers, whether it be men or women, driving well into the 70s and 80s when they can no longer see, but they can't stop working because that is their only form of income. We have a massive issue with actually being able to assist our citizens outside of their sect. The government has been in control of, the militias have been in control of our government for 30 years, since the end of the Lebanese Civil War. Which was from 1975 to 1990. And those 15 years, those militia leaders are currently, for the last 30 years, have been our government. So the Speaker of Parliament has been the same speaker for a very long time. And they renew for themselves, they handle their own, they literally control every asset of our country. And they've used divisive propaganda to divide the country on the basis of sect. Which has made it extremely difficult for people to break the barrier of fear, which is, they have this hatred towards each other based on their religion or based on their region. And the revolution finally broke that. People were able to come together and meet and create, methods of communication in public squares that we didn't have before. We also, everything's privatized, everything's been sold off. So we've had even an issue of being able to come together because there is no public space that can hold us. Care work is one of the many fights that we're currently at, and that is basically just how do we ensure that our vulnerable citizens and all of our vulnerable marginalized communities can have access to the assistance that they need and the services that they need. And you can't do that with a bankrupt and corrupt country. Government, not country. The country can be revived. It's on the basis of how do we change the system and how do we change the governing elite that have been controlling and kind of pulling the strings for so long. Hope that answered the question on that.
Yeah, I mean, I pass it just on. Agnieszka, the situation with the rent or the pension in Poland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so how it's organized on an everyday basis. I mean, as in any patriarchal system and structure, care work is tremendously underpaid and filled with, of course, female workers. There are plenty of issues when it comes to even access to public kindergartens. So there are issues with actually having even resources to send kids to kindergartens that are then private if you're unable to get a place in a public one, what's also very difficult. When it comes to care of older people, is the same issue with the structure of not having enough money to take care of yourself, not having structures for taking care of people in a house for older people, or having the resources to cover that costs. And I mean, that's all again hey Mercedes. That's again the intersection of how capitalism and patriarchy collaborate, that people cannot afford taking care of that. So it's again women taking care of older people, whether it be men or women. So yeah, I believe that it's an issue of a globalized world, not only of Poland yet. I mean, currently in Poland, that's definitely differently solved or not solved than in other countries.
Hey, Mercedes. Now we do have our third panelist. She's from Argentina, from the city of Santa Fe, to be more precise, and she is part of the Casa Amphibia, which is a feminist organization who works with people to organize care work, child care, and is also part of a bigger organization called Potencia Sur. Hi, Mercedes. We are just now talking about care work or childcare because I think there are similar issues all over the world. How do countries handle childcare or care work? Because for example, here in Switzerland, we do not really have support to childcare, or it's really, really expensive if you want to have a child be taken care for. So most or many mothers do only part-time jobs, or and have less of a pension afterwards, of course, or the grandparents are just the ones taking care. So Mercedes, how is the situation in Argentina about with that, also maybe with the corona crisis now?
Well, it's very similar to all the things that you are saying, basically. But I would like to read some things that I wrote, because my English is not very good. Actually, it's very bad. So I prefer to read if it's not a problem. Well, in our country, care work is currently delegated to women and overexploited in the context of health emergency. The state is absent since it does not guarantee rights to those who carry out care work at home, and also it's overexploited to those who are just starting their careers in the health systems. There is little access to care service for children, older adults, people with disability, or any type of pathology. Most of these jobs are done informally and not above.
Now, I think we have quite similar structures. I think maybe the gravity on how many infrastructures here or not is a bit different, but the tendencies are similar. The patriarchy is global. The government isn't really there to help. I mean, in Switzerland, it took until today until the government was really giving out money for childcare during the crisis, and we are one of the richest countries in the world. So I imagine this is still a privilege in comparison to the others. But I'm interested in, do you even talk about care work in your normal political or the normal political life in your country? Do they even talk about care work, or is it just naturally, does it come naturally that women are responsible for caring for elderly and for the children? Or is it even a topic, or do you have, like, as a feminist organization, to start from scratch to organize or raise awareness that this is even some kind of work? I'd like to start with you, Agnieszka.
Of course, it's a topic, and I believe that decades of feminist work that is behind us made it a topic, I believe, everywhere. What comes to my head right now is the current situation, that it's making it even more visible, and that it's making it very, very clear of who is sustaining the functioning of the system in reality. And yeah, in German context, it's called system relevant professions, so to say, and how much of this work, when it doesn't work, it's on the shoulders of women. But when you talk about care work, I think there is this distinction of what is professionalized care work and what is like home care work, the unpaid work that, as some economists calculate, as several billion of dollars that women should have been paid and are not. And as a person, as Agnieszka Błacik, I have a bit of an inner conflict when we talk about money, when we talk about violence and symbolic violence. Yet I believe that some people cannot understand that if we don't calculate it into dollars, you know, of how much this work is worth. And it's worth even more than $3 billion, I believe. So yeah, definitely it is a topic. There is also a lot of, I mean, I find it very difficult to touch upon this topic, because I believe that a lot of women also also find conflict between each other when it comes to care work. You know, how much easier it is to pay another woman less money and make my money so this other woman take care of my child, you know, and how it entangles us in these structures. So to say, in a Polish context, there are also discussions about that, about why some women can do feminist activism because they can afford paying a nanny to take care of their child, while other women would love to do that but don't have this privilege. So I see there is a lot of conversation still needed and a lot of structures need to transform. And I believe that this is what we are doing here now.
Yeah, I know. What's the situation at yours?
Well, at least in Lebanon, we have this massive conflict, obviously, when it comes down to it. Sorry, somebody's doing construction outside. So we will always have this conflict of how do we get women to realize their own self-worth, especially in our context. How do we get, let's say, my own mother to be convinced that, you know, the work that she did by raising me and taking care of me and tending to the household and giving up her education when she did have access to it was actually a valuable currency that she should have been, you know, at least compensated for. That, in a sense, care work, when it is for free, it is a modern day slavery. And in Lebanon, we have this additive level of modern day slavery. We have something called the kafala program. We have extremely bad laws that do not protect foreign workers that come to Lebanon to work as nannies or as housekeepers or as domestic helpers. So the issue that we have is also multi-tiered. It's not just about, because when you come down to a government, especially like Lebanon, where it is in the Middle East, and it is, whether we like it or not, still kind of infringed within these religious, you know, locks left and right. And somehow they've tied care work to religious obligation, you know, in a sense of this is what a woman does and this is what a man does, as is said in this or is stated in this. So it's about also being able to understand the value of women and to be able to fight a system that's structured in a way that it needs women to be enslaved for the system to coexist. The system cannot be the system that it is without all of us working for free, without having this whole concept of labor of love. And when it comes down to it, when in Lebanon, the kafala program, you have you know, foreign workers coming to Lebanon and working for, not, I don't want to say minuscule pay, because it's not pay. It's not sustainable living. It's not of human dignity. They cannot actually have a life of dignity or a space of their own. Even within our architecture, how it's kind of been embroidered is that if you have extra space, and these are architecture students who end up studying this way, so if you have this layout of this house and you have this little bit of extra space, you make that the domestic helper's room, even if it has no windows, no doors, and none of that. So this is another layer of how we, you know, and most domestic workers are women, and the men that are domestic workers in Lebanon also work within companies that are also abusing them. So it also ties into care work for us, ties also into racism, and ties into class, and ties into how all of these structures build on top of each other to continuously oppress the entire system.
And just out of curiosity, where do those domestic workers normally come from? Because we do have domestic workers in Switzerland as well, and they normally come from Poland or something, just because we can pay them less than normal care workers in Switzerland. I mean, it's the same system, but with, I guess, different grades of loans.
Yeah, so we have, there's a large variety. And because the worst part of it is within this kind of system, and racism does prevail. We have this kind of xenophobia towards also Syrians coming in. So the refugees are also treated this way. So we have, there's such a large list. Women and men that come from the Philippines, there's Ethiopia, there's Bangladesh, there's Sri Lanka. So, and that is another form of just underpayment. And validated by racism, and then validated extra when it's a woman. So it also builds on that. By the end of it, to break from it, and then the laws in place protect the system. So in Lebanon, the kafala program means your domestic worker comes to Lebanon, you take their passport and you lock them in the house. This in itself is a massive fight. There's great organizations that work in Lebanon. One of them, I don't want to forget anybody, but ARM, which is the anti-racism movement, works directly for women's rights and the migrant workers' rights that are, you know, infringed into our society, to work for lesser than dignifying pay. And the worst part of it is we can pay. You know, if we can't, then we need to fix the system that's already underpaying us, rather than just trickling down, you know, lesser and lesser. So that's a little bit of a back on that.
Yeah.
And you also have Sudan, which is, yeah, so we have a lot of countries that that come in.
But I think it's beautiful how you tell there's a pyramid, and then we always have like the people who have all of the lack of the privileges, like women and migrants, who are on the bottom, and just
Yeah, and then imagine migrant people of color.
It just doesn't work. Yeah. Mercedes, do you have the same like structures that women are from foreign countries, are not just because they are women, but also because of their race and class on the bottom of the society?
In our country, we have made some progress around the discussion of work, care work. But so we have a new government, and with this new national government, the Ministry of Women, Gender and Sexual Diversity was created. So this is a great thing for the feminists, but we there is not new budget approved by the Congress because the lockdown. So we are in the same. We don't have money. We don't have public politics for us, for the women. For us, we are, like you saying before, the base of that
society.
Sorry?
Society, the base of the society, of how we live together, right?
So it's maybe we are in the same. We don't have the rights we need. We don't have the women who are taking the care work. They don't have rights. They don't have payment. They don't have rights.
Yeah. I think the one point you are talking about is quite important. Now, that's just the last question about care work, because then we have to change topic because of time. How did that whole structure even become more bad during Corona crisis? Because I can imagine it did become more bad, because already in Switzerland we do have like grandparents who cannot take care anymore of the children, and people who are working at home and need to do childcare at once, and people who do childcare professionally do have too many children where they should look after. There are too many sick people in hospital. You don't really have any resting time anymore. How did that change in your country with the Corona crisis?
Actually, if it's fine, would like to add something also to what you were talking before about migrant care workers, because I find it actually very interesting when it comes to Poland, which is located at the border of Schengen, so to say, previously, like the border of European Union. And as you said, a lot of Polish care workers go to work to Germany or to Switzerland or to Austria. Why do they do that? Because they get paid more than in Poland, yet no German person would ever work for this money. And usually they are women, so usually they are also mothers that leave their kids for several months to work and take care of older people in Germany, and thanks to this money, be able to financially take care of their kids. What's interesting here is that the same thing happens with Ukrainian women working in Poland. So when you get this concept of the West, you know, and this Eastern Europe, which is being located there, and how people come from more Eastern countries to Western countries to be more paid more and better, but yet still abandoning their families and missing their kids. That's you know, the money that cannot be paid for. And in the current situation, there's a lot of also people that got stuck in Germany, and also prefer, like female care workers that would prefer to stay in Germany because they can work and be paid, and they don't know if they will be able to sustain themselves financially back in Poland. And as the borders are closed, it's safer for them economically to stay there. The question was about how it makes more visible. I think that it's also like it's visible on many different layers, on layers of say like quite privileged women that can do the work but then have kids and have to be with with kids at home, and there is no access to nannies, and the husbands are working. Like my sisters both have 2 kids and they are alone with them basically 24/7, and they cannot literally go to pee without the child crying or needing to respond to the needs of the child, and that's already exhausting enough, so to say. And yes, and then I mean there are also other aspects of being isolated at home and not having psychological safety, and feeling anxiety and fear and insecurity of what's going to happen further on and how you're going to go on with that. In Poland, there's a lot of anxiety coming with the fear of the ruling party and what's going to happen further on, because the current situation is not making people feel any safer. Also fear of poverty, of the crisis that is indulging the tensions between the people. And then again, like I think that when we talk about care work, it's much broader than just being a mother and having kids, that there are all these structures of older people, of care work that is structured, and you cannot really give it up, and who is affected and who is on the front line when it comes to getting infected, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that's a really important thing you say. It's not just like mothers, but because there are so many different layers of people who need to take more care now than before, or are more stressed out, and the thing with fear and really not knowing when is this going to end, and is there even an improvement of the structures, or do I lose my job now? Everything there are so many perspectives on the situation right now, especially for women, because also typically women's jobs are now the ones who are called heroes, and on the other hand need to work more, don't really have normal shifts anymore, and anything stuff like that. Yeah, Mercedes, how did like childcare or care for elderly during Corona crisis change?
Well, in this context of global pandemic, one can see the bad condition of those who undertake care work, both in public, private, and community spheres. The state doesn't offer concrete solution, public politics, and regulation of this work. On the other hand, the government puts the police in the place of taking care. The government put the police in the place of caretakers, which it's absurd because they don't take care of us, they control us. Violating human rights through abuse of power in the poorest neighborhoods. I don't know if that answered the question, but
yeah, I think it's quite important that we also talk about how the government is directly having an effect on the oppression, and the police was saying to people, hey, you should stay at home. There's no, or even less democracy now than it has been before, and especially women who can't go outside of their houses, even though they're sometimes, or even more, are experiencing violence, which leads us to the next part of this discussion. That's really does affect women, and maybe also I think queer people, because they just can't go to safe spaces.
Yes, and put in the same level the control and the care, and it's not the same. It's not the same control people, and that it's not the same.
Yeah, true. Yeah, you can just take care and controlling people and taking care of people is just not the same, even though some countries might think that. Just something for the listeners here. You have that question and answer button down there below, and if you have any questions, you can write them there. I forgot that in the beginning, so if you have any questions for the three panelists, you can write them. And in the end, we'll have a round of people who are answering questions. So to the next point, I really want to talk about violence against women and queer people during this crisis, because as we already said, the notion that you should stay at home is not really safe for everyone. In fact, it's even more difficult or dangerous for many women to stay at home, being enclosed, and don't even have the opportunity to call for help. And also maybe the facilities where they should go to or could go to are closed. So what is the situation in Lebanon, or how did the coronavirus affect that situation?
I think it's internationally, we can say equally that what Corona has done in isolation and forcing people to be in spaces that are unsafe and toxic at most times has obviously increased the numbers of gender-based violence and domestic violence. And when we want to tie it into what's going on with LGBTQI individuals, especially in the Middle East, having to be reshuffled back into places that it took them a long time to get out of, whether it be the home or just losing that job. Because again, I just want to give it a little bit more of a base. We've had a revolution for 7 months, and that is on the basis of 30 years of corruption. We are going through the hardest financial crisis Lebanon has ever experienced. We've devalued by our currency by over 60%. There's no way we can keep living logically with the 53% increase in prices on products, especially when we import 90% of our consumption. So 90% of the things that we use are coming from abroad. We have to pay that in dollars. Our currency has lost over 60% of its value. It went from 1,500 to 4,500 for $1, which entails that not only is the massive gap, so in my opinion, there is no such thing as a middle class in Lebanon. There are the 1% who are extremely rich and the 90% that are now slowly all just going beneath the poverty line. At one point, I think we have reached about 60 to 63% unemployment rate. 75% of our country is in need of aid. So it's hit and impacted the entire country in such a way that it's just destroyed any, when we talked about the pyramid and the trickling, that bottom, there's no foundation anymore. And to ask people, just to respond back to Corona, to ask people to stay home was obsolete. Because first of all, in Lebanon, when the revolution is still completely in grasp and still functioning, it was the people who called for a stay-at-home order before the government did. It was the people who isolated themselves. We also come from a country that is very much bred on war and occupation and colonization. So we know how to have a storage full of food. We know how to last in long times in bunkers and in private shelters. Now the issue is access to food. So it's not about just being able to put it away. We don't have access to it anymore. So the entire country is on the streets. We lost a young man to military abuse, to military gunfire a few days ago. His name was Fawaz, and he was 26 years old. So the entire revolution yesterday, all the revolutionaries were on the streets, and the social distancing is a long thing for us. And it's really sad because I don't want to say this quote, but I think it's probably the most most engulfing quote to express what's going on. The hashtag that was going around is "We'll die from hunger before we die from Corona," and that pretty much embodies what's happening in Lebanon right now. We're talking across classes. Obviously, there are a lot of people that are extremely privileged that are not even aware that they do a lot of that bickering of stay home, and then you're like, but they have no home. 1 meter squared is not a home. No access to clean water, no access to electricity is not a home. And you're talking that is the case for all of Lebanon. So we have half the day with no electricity. No matter what class you're at, you have to pay for a generator separately than you pay for electricity. And most communities run out of water because we don't have access to clean water. And this was supposedly a country that was considered the Switzerland of the East, which is, you know, it just goes to show how far corruption had engraved. So when it comes to violence against LGBTQI and women, of course, that trickles directly into the system, because also the women that are also forced at home, they're also forced under extremely strenuous financial conditions. So they can't really have access to get out. They don't have access to Instagram to find a hotline number. They don't have access to Facebook. They don't have access to a phone line. Most of these women cannot go and complain to the police, because then the police call in the husband to sign a paper, and then the husband knows that she complained and she's got to go home back to him. Whether, you know, because the government has not set up methods or methodologies for women to be able to take into a safe space. LGBTQI is illegal in Lebanon. We have something called 534, where we can face up to a year in jail. So that means to bite on the wound. If you are living in a homophobic home, you write it out, because what the government would do to you could possibly be worse. Although obviously situations at home are usually horrible conditions on mental health and depression and anxiety. So that in itself is also going to be, is something that most activists need to be focusing on, is how to maintain people's mental health throughout this, especially with all of these prevailing conditions that, you know, each country, of course, according to its situation, has to live under, and then ensuring that these people, when they do come out of this lockdown, which Lebanon is currently doing, by June 8th will completely opened. And that's why I will be returning on June 8th to the streets. And if they're listening to me as a government, I hope they know that. No corona or otherwise. So now what we're trying to do, at least as an organization, as activists, is to maintain our work, to keep the momentum going, to ensure that fundraisers are still happening for people that are under poverty line, which is the mass majority of the country. Making sure that there are not just hotlines, but methods of communication. I don't want you to feel so skewed in and then you call and that's when I can come and help you. I need you to know that when I help you, what happens afterwards? How can I ensure that you stay safe? Especially in a country that has something called honor killings, where it is acceptable for a man to go murder, which is something we had about 3 weeks ago. A woman was murdered because her husband had heard a rumor of an affair. And then he murdered his brother, who he thought she was having an affair with, and he murdered his other brother because he thought that he knew about the affair. So it's just insane that we can still allow murder and then to put honor next to it as if that's a thing. So there's a lot of campaigns, especially by an activist in Tunis named Amani, who did this a few years ago, where she said, "My body is not your honor. My body is mine." So that's also, you know, it's just about making sure that we maintain communication and maintain trying to assist all these people with mental health support just until the lockdown is over and we need to find an alternative. It can't just always be reach out to us. We've got to start seeking them out ourselves.
That was really strong. I have a more specific question, just follow-up question about that. If you say women don't really have Instagram or Facebook, how do you reach out to them? What do you specifically do to give them like knowledge that there is a network, that it is possible to organize?
Yeah. So there's a lot of organizations that work in Lebanon on this particular thing about creating communication and making sure that people are aware that they could reach out. I've been really, because I'm stuck in isolation too. So all I can do is think and you know, cry about it and then think of something else. And hopefully that'll lead me to some sort of solution. And you know, like what we're doing today, I think is extremely imperative, not just for us as activists or as feminists, but really us as people trying to change the systems that is a global system that is affecting all of us on different levels, but still affecting all of us. I think the only time we are all equal is during injustice and oppression. Everything else we're not equal with. So we always need to just make sure that we're fighting against that current. I would like to start seeing a reaction, not towards I want to give a woman a safe space as much as I want to give him help. I need him to go to a shrink before I can get her out of this household, especially in Lebanon where she might end up going back to it. It's not so much about me just supporting her mental health, it's making him realize what he did. It's about punishing his action. And I hate that word punishment, but really it's about holding them accountable for their abuse of whether it be the patriarchy or the household structure or any of that. Maybe we need to start lobbying as far as governments are concerned. It's not just about you knowing that you could reach out to me. It's about him knowing that he will be held accountable. So whether it be because we don't have any laws against that really protect women against violence or sexual abuse or harassment. So that's something that I really need to, I want to always reiterate when it comes to lobbying and going against these governments and these policies. It's not just about you helping me stay safe. It's about you stopping him from continuously doing this. And how do we put these factors in place? Is it about making sure that you have mandatory, have to go to a shrink for the next 2 months to deal with your anger, to deal with these innate things? I saw a post by a young activist today. She's an artist that I really, really appreciate and love. She was talking about her young 10-year-old cousin, and she's like, I'm so afraid of him growing up because he might be sensitive and loves flowers and books today, but no, God knows he's going to stop hugging his classmates tomorrow, and he's going to start fist bumping, slapping on the back, and next thing you know, that's where aggression starts building in. So of course, education is extremely important, but it's also just making sure that holding them accountable is the main thing, where women know that I'm not going back into the same household with me having better mental health, but him having better mental health.
Okay, I think that's quite an important topic you're talking about, not just helping or having a network, but also really changing the discourse, how people are talking about violence, what is honor, what is not honor, what is violence, where does it come from? Yeah, Agnieszka, how do you see the situation in Poland with violence against women? I think since the time is running really fast, you can also talk about abortion protests that have already taken place or are still taking place, because I think, and how you organize that maybe. But first of all, violence and abortion rights.
Well, it's a lot of things at the same time. Just a short remark to Dinah, thank you so much for what you said, it's amazing. And yeah, just to echo that, I think that holding accountable is the right choice of words. And if we'll start to think about it as punishment for this kind of violence, it's holding accountable, and it's creating the norms in which it's very clear what are the consequences of this kind of behaviors. Yeah, so, I mean, of course, because of the totalitarian structures of homes and patriarchal families, etc. This is a global issue of domestic violence, and sadly, in Poland also home is a place of fear for so many women and kids that are now forced to stay there. The domestic violence rose 30% within European countries that introduced self-isolation. What's important to notice here, I believe, is that reporting violence does not mean that this is the all violence that happens. And in Poland, it's very, very visible that statistics are great, and a lot of men in Poland would tell you that, look at Sweden, there is so much domestic violence. In Poland, there is no. But the truth is that women just don't report that because they know that they will not be helped. They know that they will receive double abuse for reporting that. And until we'll get into the moment in which women will really know that they will be offered support and will really trust that there is a structure that will support them, it's not going to happen. And it's still a work in front of us. What's important to notice, to mention here, is that several days ago, the new law got introduced in Poland after years and years of fighting that, which is immediate isolation from perpetrator. So to say, when you report a violence, the perpetrator of the violence can be immediately displaced or removed for 14 days, and it can be later on prolonged. And I find it extremely important also in the times of pandemic. Before, it could only happen after the long law case, which is also emotionally exhausting.
And that's already working now, also during the crisis.
It got pushed on 30th of April, so last week. Yeah. And
I mean, if you say this displacement takes place immediately, do you have like enough houses for women where they could go to, or infrastructures if they can't go back home? Because in Britain, there is a problem. We don't have enough spaces for women actually who experience violence.
I mean, that's also the thing, you know, the law is the law and the reality is the reality. I think that it's a step that the law is there, but it still will take a lot of time to use this law, to practice this law, to create structures that will make it possible to happen, that will not question women if this violence was violent enough for the perpetrator to be displaced, etc. And if there's still a lot of, you know, this discussion of validating the truth of the reportment, etc., etc. So, I mean, in this very moment, I cannot tell you because it's just several days. It's valid. I will manifest so that it will be functioning well.
Mercedes, how did you in Argentina experience the change of, or I think over probably also rise of violence against women during the coronavirus and the isolation?
Well, this year we have 117 femicides, in 36 of them in quarantine. It means that every 26 hours they murder one more of us. So we know that the 70% of the murderers were the partner or ex-partner. Now we got the Ministry of Women, Gender and Sexual Diversity, but with no budget. So there's not much that they can do about. But now in the lockdown, they made some agreements with hotels to accommodate those who need it. I don't know if I've been clear. Well, however, the situation is much deeper than access to make the complaint, not only because of the lack of gender perspective of the police station and justice, also the structural economic inequality that today women and trans women live in Argentina. That situation of lockdown worsens, leaving us exposed to situation of extreme violence. I will love to say so much more because I understand all the things that you are saying, but the language now it's been like a limit to me. So sorry for being so short. I will like say so much more if I will talk in Spanish. Sorry for that.
Yeah, sadly I can't talk Spanish. That's a problem. But I think we see very similar structures here because we are. I mean, there is an increasement of violence. Then either you do have legal structures or you don't have any at all. And if you have, it's not the same as okay, there's enough money and space for women who actually experience it, or we believe those women or queer people, children, whoever, that they are actually experiencing violence. And my question for you is, how do you as an organization try to make this more visible or believable that is really a problem, and what do you want from the government, how they want to act, should act, or maybe how do you organize? I mean, Diana, you already said how you organize a little bit, but for example, in Poland or in Argentina, how do you organize structures for women, or what does your organization plan to do with that situation?
We believe that we need each other. We believe in to go out for this problem. We need the community. We need to be a lot of women doing stuff. We are now helping one girl with one case of violence, and she she got nothing. So we are building a home, a little home with our hands and with no budget from the government. So we are, I don't know how to say it, I hate it. We are building a little home in his neighborhood, in her neighborhood, so we can be safe with her baby. And we are now we are trying to make some, I don't know how to say it in English, cooperativas.
Operations.
Yes, for work together, like cleaning the neighborhood, and we are paying for that.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that the problem is the work and the house. If the woman don't have where to live and work for living, we know that she will be back with her partner that well.
Yeah. So the thing you say is not only to give houses or places to live by, but also women are very often economically dependent on their partners, so they really have to go back since there is no support from the government whatsoever. And you as an organization try to organize this work or a place where they could like build up a life on their own, like that.
Yes, and the community. We are really sure that that if we do all this work, but we are not making organization, we are not together, it's the same. We need to be together. We need to know that the woman that live in the same neighborhood that me, it's my she can help me and I can help her. So that's the important thing also to do. We don't have the money or the work or the home, but we have us, and that's very important to start, because we are not the government, we are not the state. We don't have the money and the power, but we have together.
Yeah, well, sometimes the community or the people just is the power, because you are together and you're helping each other out. And I think it's really important you organize that with each other and like build up this network. But now I'll pass on to Agnieszka. How does your organization handle this situation with the increased violence on women in Poland? Maybe like media-like, or also with concrete actions?
Mm-hmm. First, I just want to say thank you to Mercedes, because I know how much we learned from a feminist movement from Argentina, and how great you organize, and how we can learn from you how to create nourishing relationships with each other. It's really, really inspiring also to know how different media of communication you're using to support each other, and how we can see supportive sisters in you whenever we need support, and we needed that and we got it. Yeah, so as Dinah also said, there's a lot of fundraisers for support which are open, and people can donate for them. There are new phone numbers open for people to reach out and receive psychological help, or certain steps that can be taken when it comes to legal procedures. The issue is that it's also discutable if you can actually make a phone call. And if there is an access to send a text message or have a formula that doesn't make you speak in front of the person that can be your perpetuator. There are also support groups online that you can join. Yeah, and I mean, the conversation is also open in media, of course, mainly in feminist groups and feminist circles, yet they circulate widely, and it's really, really hopeful to see how community is organizing and how many support structures are being put in place. Of course, a lot of that work is a voluntary work that I don't need to even say, possibly.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but I think it's really important that you mentioned, just because there is the access to a phone number, maybe sometimes you don't even have the place or space to call because you're enclosed in that room, which is really heavy. Yeah,
and building a little bit on what Mercedes said and how the situation shows us that solidarity is our power and solidarity is our weapon, and how we can support each other, and how we need to create, like, you know, for me, feminism is a lot about nourishing relationships and connections, and how we can be like a safety net for each other. So whenever I fall, there is another person, and let's imagine the post-gender world that this person is just the person that holds me and supports me. And that's the structures that start to pop up right now, and the question is how we will keep them in place.
Yeah, Dana, do you want to say something about structures too?
I want to also reiterate exactly what Mercedes said about collective consciousness. We keep saying the world we're in a globalized world, yet we don't use it for the benefit of ours as much as they use it for our oppression. We need to be doing more of this. You know, Poland needs to know what's happening in Lebanon. Lebanon needs to know what's happening in Switzerland. Switzerland needs to know what's happening in Argentina. We have difference of currency. We use the stock market controls all of our worlds, yet we somehow don't know how to be able to penetrate that sphere and use it to kind of also be able to communicate to one another and ensure that we're always functioning. Like we said about, you know, migrant workers going from one place to another. If feminists in Germany and in Switzerland and in Lebanon, all of them are connecting, the fundraiser wouldn't just be limited to Lebanon, wouldn't just be limited to Poland. The fundraiser needs to be international. It needs to be for the betterment of women in all spaces, because the empowerment of one woman is a step towards the empowerment of us all. We always say empower women, empower women. I also think that we also need to be branching out to women collectively working with other women, even if it's not in our grassroots context, because we all work community-based, which is extremely important. But this conversation is imperative to constantly be able to understand where everyone is coming from and just how far, because we are fighting the patriarchy, which is global. We are fighting capitalism, which is global. And we need to start putting women's rights as a global conversation, even internally with us, on an everyday basis, and try to find that interwoven intersection between all of us to ensure that we're taking steps to change whatever status that we're in. My three favorite words are mobilization, information, and communication. So those are the things that I love to do. And what I do is I use art to do the best I can with it, whether it's hosting free exhibitions to make it more accessible, or being online, or being in public spheres that don't usually get utilized for art, for engaging with conversation. What you were saying about televisions, using media, and somehow making people understand that it's not something that, because I'm also sick and tired of using the word, of hearing people use the word feminist as if it's an offensive term, like, oh no. We need to be able to use this word a lot more just across the board in ad agencies and all of that. And I think if we start utilizing those methods, a billboard in particular areas of Lebanon will do a lot more than a social media campaign. But getting that funded and then you go into that. And maybe we need to start setting up forms of where we can fund one another, rather than us looking for a donor body or a funding body that might be mainly patriarchal, or mainly functioning under a patriarchal system, or within the capitalist system that's too caught up in multiple cogs for it to actually function like a clock, whereas we can create these intricate functions ourselves to make our tools, our ideas, the commodity itself, to exchange that. And I think I think we're on our way there, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but thank God for COVID at this particular point. It's making people, talk a lot more than just constantly trying to produce and function. It's nice to finally have forms of dialogue.
Yeah, but I think the thing you said with thanks to COVID, I think it's a bit difficult to say, but we now have time to actually sit home and have this talk, and the problems which are universal are just now very much more visible. I mean, most of us knew already before, but now we feel it more and more. People are even realizing it, and it's quite the moment to grasp this. And also the thing that you said about having an international network, because the patriarchy or the capitalism is global. I mean, we see it during these conversations. We have very similar problems, also just with different gravity, how hard it is, how hard the situation is. I mean, I couldn't compare myself to a situation to a woman in Lebanon, but I mean, the structures which are evoking those things are the same. So I also wanted to talk about abortion rights, because in many countries, we begin with the states. They are just saying, yeah, abortion is not necessary, or it's not essential. Now you shouldn't be able to abort anymore, or Ireland. And I think in Poland this was or is an ongoing situation, and right now it's even more burning than before, right?
So where it starts, if it's more burning than before, it's burning. It's burning, it was burning, and it will still be burning for quite a while. Last week, there was a law put under discussion, the same one from 2016, taken out from the freezer and discussed again, the full abortion ban. It was not rejected, it was not accepted. So to say, it's still in a commission to be worked on further. It got interpreted in very different ways in different feminist circles. Some of them treated it as a failure because it was not fully rejected. Other ones treated it as a small victory in a long fight that we are in already for years. So currently in Poland, you can abort if it's pregnancy from illegal act, which is a rape. Yet to prove a rape is a horrible journey, and it's not going to be definitely accepted or not, or when the life of the mother is being put in danger, or if the genetically embryo is exposed to pain. Yearly, there is about 1,500 abortions legally conducted in Poland, out of which 55 of them are from illegal act, so to say. The structures that were functioning before when it comes to giving women access to abortion are now very much challenged. So to say, there are certain organizations that, like Ciocia Basia, one of our activists is also part of Ciocia Basia, the organization that supports Polish women to get legal abortion in Germany. Usually it means that you need to travel to Germany and have the procedure happening here. Right now, traveling is almost impossible. And even if you will be able to cross the border, then you are obliged to do 14 weeks of self-quarantine. And a lot of women cannot, barely can afford to travel there and back and cover the costs of the abortion, but then not working for 2 weeks is making it impossible. The medical abortion was possible via post, but right now, as we know, the letters are being controlled, so it's also much more difficult to have an access to a safe abortion if you are localized in Poland. It's not impossible, so to say. It's illegal, but it's not impossible, and there are ways and numbers and communications and women sharing access to webpage and phone numbers to get access to that.
So,
maybe what's
no, keep on.
Because you are asking also about the demonstrations and like, I mean, after 2016, I mean, I believe that we all know what was happening in Poland 2016 when hundreds of thousands of women went out on the streets, and it was not anymore just self-defined radical feminists going out, but sisters, mothers, aunties, and it was really beautiful and dramatic to see what was happening 2 weeks ago and just before. I mean, it was 15th, 16th of April, so it was like several weeks ago, the mobilization of women to organize strikes and protests in Poland, and the creativity that came out of that, being like, okay, so now it's pandemic, now they decided to discuss abortion ban, which is like a gesture of total disrespect towards citizens. And the actions that were conducted in the end were really powerful and really connecting, and the pace of mobilization was immense.
Yeah, I was quite impressed because I don't know whether you two know about protests or have seen them, but it was like cars instead of people on the streets, like a demonstration in cars, because you couldn't touch each other, but you still wanted to stand there and fight for your rights. And I was moved to tears when I saw that. And I think it's really important to say you are still fighting on, even though the conditions to give access to people to abortion is hard or nearly impossible. Yeah, but I really don't know enough about the situations, for example, in Argentina, how you handle abortion. Mercedes, could you talk about the topic a bit?
I just would like to say that if Mercedes needs some help with translation, I'm happy to support you. Si necesitas un poco de ayuda con traducción, estoy aquí.
Ay, sí, hablas español, qué bien. Well, sorry. I will read if you, sorry. Yes, if you didn't have a problem, I will read some stuff. Yes, well, in Argentina, abortion is not yet fully voluntary and legal. 30 years ago, at the will of Campaña Nacional por el Aborto Legal, Seguro y Gratuito, and only 2 years ago did it obtain the majority of votes in the Chamber of Deputies, but not in Senate. So it's still a problem that, and like you say, Anishka, I don't know if I say it right, there is not impossible to do an abortion. It's not legal yet, and there is a protocol that guarantees the legal interruption of pregnancy only if you have been raped or you have health issues, and it's applied in some state of the country that adhere to the protocol, but is still denied by health professional and extreme right movement. So some health professionals can say no to do an abortion. I don't know if I'm saying right. And the other hand, there are groups of feminists who, through different articulations, guarantee the practice of medication together with different sectors of the public health system that respect this protocol. Well, now in the lockdown, it's been more difficult to access to the health system for other things that it's not COVID. basically. So it's been very difficult to guarantee the legal interruption of pregnancy.
I think it was perfect. I mean, the thing you said, it's partly illegal, it's partly legal. It's quite similar to Poland in the aspect of you organize for abortions for people who cannot afford it or just cannot reach those structures. But also now with COVID-19, it's called not essential, even though we can't wait for another 14 weeks or something, 14 days, because you can't just wait with abortion. I don't know why people are not getting it, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Dinah, do you want to talk about abortion rights in Lebanon?
We don't have any, so it's absolutely illegal. Abortion is 100% illegal, and anyone that does an abortion or assists in the happening of an abortion can face from 6 months to 3 years in jail. So it's not only illegal, it's also punishable to the highest degree of the law. We have had a positive thing, in a sense, the repeal of a particular law, 522, which is when rapists, this I believe happened in, I was checking for a second because I wasn't remembering the date exactly, if it was 2017. But in 2017, I believe the 522, which was that if you raped a person that was not considered your wife, quote unquote, this is the wording of the law, not your partner, that as long as you married her, you didn't go to jail. This also connects back to honor and in a sense, reiterating that a woman is in a way a male's property, and until then, it's as if you raped her, therefore you've made her tarnished, and therefore she can't get married, and now you must take that responsibility. So this was appealed, this was removed in 2017, but we to this day still have the abortion ban. We cannot have an abortion in anything, in any case. It was in 1969 that they added that we can in a life or death situation, but then you go back to that and you kind of want to break it down as to what that actually entails, because a life or death situation doesn't necessarily just mean physical death. I mean, if you cannot take care of this child, if you cannot have the proper mental health, if you can't have, so all of this is not taken into account. So, and we also have this, but of course, 522 being canceled for the rape and abortion, it's also comes back around, which is the sad law of 539 till 546. So we have all of these numbers. So from the 5s to the 700s, it's just horrible. So 539 to 546, you obviously can you can marry when a girl is underage, as long as you have the consent of her parents. So this is another form of, I believe, whether we like it or not, it is rape of a child. It is, I don't care if my mother and father agree. This is another fight and another battle that we have to fight on. So abortion in itself, I think, is their way of managing to maintain these laws. And I mean, NGOs and organizations have been lobbying for years to try to remove them. Removing the you have to marry a rapist law was a massive win, but it's not as fulfilling as we would have wanted it to be, simply because there is still an article 503 of the Penal Code defines the crime of rape as forced sexual intercourse against someone who is not his wife or by violence. The 2004 law on domestic violence, meanwhile, makes threats of violence by a spouse to claim marital right to intercourse. So then you have religion come back into it, which is the religious courts that we have in Lebanon of it is the responsibility of the wife to have sex with her husband, even if she doesn't want to, which obviously to us, it's marital rape. To them, it's more of, well, this is her obligation, especially when to this day we have, when we have marriage ceremonies and part of the statement, whether it be Christian or Muslim or Druze, is a woman must obey her husband. So this in itself, I think, is another thing that obviously makes it a horrible strain. And being that it is illegal in Lebanon, we have 2,800,000 estimated in 2003 as far as abortions, and 12% of those resulted in marital death, maternal death. So it's an endless thing. It all exists on the black market. Usually you need to know a friend who knows a friend who gets you the contact. And I've been on that link of like, this is the doctor that I trust, so here, give it to this person who passes it on and passes it on. But then if this doctor ever gets arrested, it destroys the entire network. And then all of these women are under threat. So it's a very, it's an extremely tight situation. My organization doesn't work directly on that law or lobbying for these laws, but there are organizations that do in Lebanon that we all work together. And this is why I always say communication, because just being able to work with all these NGOs and see the different, because there's just so many laws. It's not even, we can't say that we're fighting for women's rights. We're fighting for every single possible element to give a woman a life of dignity, and LGBTQI a right to dignity, and marginalized community a right to dignity. So you're going to need a lot of fighting fronts, as they say. But yeah, this is the situation there, and we still, I mean, it's a very sad thing. We not just live in a patriarchal society, but we live in a society governed by religion. There is no separation between church and state. So in the end, when you go to court, you go to that religious court, which is dictative of your religion or of that authority, and the laws vary, and each judge reads the law differently, and they, translate it differently. So you're not just fighting a set status of words, you're also fighting a mindset, you're fighting an interpretation of the mindset, and then you're trying to fight the social structure that reaffirms this mindset. So yeah.
Thank you for this really, I think global approach, how your government and state is one time more completely different also in the build up with the come together of the state and religion, because I think that's something that separates Lebanon a little bit from the other countries, even though, I mean, we also have, quite strong traits of religion left. I mean, rape was legal in Switzerland in marriage until the 1990s, so late 1990s also. It's not that far away. Sorry.
Drawing to this idea of legality or not legality, I think what Dinah was saying is very important here, that it's not only about the law, it's about this very deeply, like ideologically rooted, like the values that people believe in. So even if we will create a law and make it legal, that doesn't mean that it changes. It's like just a tip top on the road to change it, because the shift of attitudes and values and approaches takes much, much longer. Just to have the note of that.
Exactly. Only because you have like the approach it or the possibility, maybe you just don't think about it as an option altogether like that.
Yeah, I mean, sexual harassment is also a crime. Is it being reported? No.
Yeah.
Not always.
Not at all.
I have had a right to report it thousands of times, and I've chosen not to. And I mean, I believe that many people do that. I'm thinking, like, if we are to shift the norms where, the norm is not to do that, it's still a long road in front of us.
Yeah.
True. Well, I think that leads back to the holding accountable for. It's not only that we women must like have those structures, but also how we as a society think about rape and who is guilty and who should be punished or held accountable for. So it's always both sides, not only one side that has to act. I think we are quite long already in this discussion, and I want to close it with one last question on what do you think is made more visible because of coronavirus and made your organizations or your network be more capable of discussing about or changing also after coronavirus? So what is the outcome, maybe on a more positive side? So because we had quite a dark conversation now for 1.5 hours, and maybe what's like the positive side of this whole situation we are in, and how you organize that, or maybe like you already said, Dino, that we have time and space for such talks and international talks. What do you take out of it like that? I think we can start with you then.
The positive of you know, what could come out of Corona is first of all, seeing the issues and disparity when it comes to class struggle and capitalism, and how we really have that in itself, because we were just saying, it's not just about changing the law, it is about changing the mindset. And I feel like a large part of what happened with Corona is a lot of people were exposed to a different mindset. They were exposed to what a class struggle is. I wrote something that I think is super, like, it really got to me, which is sharing experiences is not the same as shared experience. And we need to get to a point where we're not just sharing our experience, but we're putting it out there to such a degree that it becomes the norm. And sharing this class struggle that people are obviously suffering under, and capitalism and how it is failing. People should no longer feel like a liability. We are not the liability, capitalism is. And that, I think, is a lot of what has pressured us into maybe feeling hopeless at points. We realize that we're a lot stronger than we were told we were. Even though we, and I mean, not to quote, Audre Lorde says, you know, the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. But I think that we also, but I don't think that they had the internet. We can't use their tools, but we can talk about their tools and the issues with their tools. And instead of using a Philip wrench, maybe use, you know, a flathead. We need to just start pushing past that and creating a very visible conversation that they cannot escape. So I think the positive thing is that people are talking. People are vastly more aware of class struggles and class difference, and people are being held accountable, whether it's like something as simple or as stupid as influencers that are extremely privileged and rich getting attacked by people saying like, yeah, it's easy for you to sit at home in your mansion. That didn't used to happen before. We used to glorify these famous people. And it's just giving you that kind of new understanding of what is struggle and what is class difference and what is oppression. It puts people in their place, and at the same time, it energizes people to realize just how much strength they have. If I've survived all of that, then I sure as heck can survive what's coming and change it, hopefully.
I think that was just beautiful. Also how you realize how much strength you have, but also how much strength lays in the community actually itself. That you have so much power only by organizing, and that people who are in those big mansions are really not more important and should not have more power than you have, or most possibly also don't really have if you really organize. Yeah, Mercedes, do you want to add something?
I believe that this crisis, in this crisis, the organizations are taking a leading place in the politics, are resolving the hungry. Here in Argentina, there's like the half of the population is poor, is really poor. We don't have work, we don't have money, we don't have to eat. So the organizations are really, we are taking the place to resolve the hungry problem of, we are part of the solution of this problem. And we are seeing that this system doesn't work. We have a government, I don't know how to say it, Agnieszka, ¿cómo digo que superamos una crisis de 4 años del anterior gobierno?
Oh, wow. We overcame the crisis of 4 years of the previous government.
That the previous government leave us that with the half of the country poor. So this only leave us poorest than before. So the organization are part of the solution, and this is clear. And that I believe that only that is the positive of this crisis, because the new government don't have a clue of what to do with this situation, and I believe that that is what I can say.
Yeah, I think what also is important probably for your situation is that people don't really forget, I guess, who really helped them and which network worked and which one didn't. And if you say we overcame like 4 years of oppression and now we are at this state that people are really realizing who helps them and who doesn't. And I think that's also something I fear, that people tend to forget too fast about what really helped them during the crisis, but maybe I'm just pessimistic. Agnieszka, do you want to? Yeah.
And because they help each other. We are a country, we have a lot of organization, and we take the politics like something like we do, like something we do all the days. So it's not something that is very far of us. Well, that.
So it's not really separated, but it's like flowing through the whole society. But yeah, but still, sometimes I think people maybe forget too fast who was really essential during the crisis. But Agnieszka, do you want to say something positive? Sorry, I'm still tending on the negative side.
Yeah, it is said before, the crisis is always the time for innovation to happen, and this is what's happening. And echoing what Dinah said, and Mercedes also thinking about how we see right now how patriarchy collaborates with capitalism, with white supremacy, and how certain problems that maybe were visible but not so visible get extremely visible right now. So we see that the system doesn't work and the master's house is falling, you know. And yeah, I mean, what's in my, you know, like there are two paths when I observe what's happening right now. One of them is the dark one, but we are going with the bright one for the end. And this bright vision for a post-capitalist world is based on community and locality. And this is what we were talking about here, on communities that are communities of support and trust, communities that can support other communities, even if we don't understand each other, even if we have different skin colors and different religions, thinking about how, you know, in community and in collaboration, we find the power and force. And I actually see it happening already now, as I was already saying, thank you to Mercedes for support from Argentinian sisters during our protests, even several weeks ago, just knowing that there are people that are going to shout loud with us, not for us, but with us, because they know that we share the same struggles. So yeah, I think that maybe it's the moment in which we realize that we don't need to be allies, but we can be accomplices and we can be partners in crimes, deconstruct the house together and share the tools that we have with one another and adapt them to our needs.
Well, that was just beautiful, that with us, not for us, and the solidarity around the world, and just to understand that we are like one whole family. That's really, really the bright side. I can imagine, or I really believe, actually, that's all what feminism is all about, isn't it? It's about really, it's sisterhood. It's not only for each other, but with each other. I think I'm going to close this discussion now, because we are already over 1 hour and a half, and I thank you a lot for coming here, for discussing, for taking your time. I think we'll stay in touch. No, I don't think, I really believe we stay in touch. And thank you to all the listeners or watchers for your questions. I tried to put them all in the conversations. I don't think I could respect them all, but I hope you still took some learnings and some motivation to organize all around the world. So thank you a lot.